Hello again, Giants fans, and welcome to take two of the Valentine's Views podcast here on Big Blue View Radio. Apologize for the earlier snafu. If you joined us on the live stream, had to cancel out because of an echo that I was hearing in my headphones. We'll cross our fingers and hope that this time we're good to go. We'll be reviewing Giants Jets. We'll be talking about Daniel Jones. We'll be talking about the trade deadline, talking about all that stuff. And here to help me do it, as always, the day after games is Tony Del Genio of Big Blue View. Morning, Tony. How you doing?
Well, I'm hearing echoes, Ed, but they're echoes of the 2010 Deshaun Jackson punt return, not the type of echoes you were referring to.
Oh, Tony. Did you really have to go there? Did you really have to start my day that way?
It's that kind of morning.
Well, it is, but then again, it isn't. So let's start with the good news. Let's start with the surprising news we got this morning that quarterback Daniel Jones has been cleared for contact, which means he's likely to play this coming Sunday against the Las Vegas Raiders. And after what happened on Sunday, that news comes absolutely in the nick of time, if maybe not a little bit too late.
Yeah, and it's good at this point as far as the season goes. The Giants would have to run the table to basically to be a contender for a playoff position, and regardless of what the math is, they just look like a bad team right now. So it has nothing to do with that, but obviously, since the likelihood is that they're going to have a fairly high draft position, uh, they've got to find out in the rest of the season whether Daniel Jones can be the guy for them. Whether they can do that with the state of the offensive line, I don't know whether it's even possible. But at any rate, they're going to have to make a decision before the next draft as to whether they're going to stick with him or whether they're going to draft a quarterback in the first round. And so it at the very least, it's good having him back, because it'll give them a chance to make that evaluation more fully before they've got to make a decision. And I'm just happy for him, because the guy doesn't deserve what he's gotten as a Giant. And so you want anyone to be fully healthy, and especially him.
This is true. My Daniel Jones bobblehead is happy this morning too. So, so
Watch that neck.
yeah. Well, it does kind of bounce around a little, doesn't it? Let's hope it doesn't get bounced around too much in real life in the next few weeks, and
Yeah, Max Crosby coming up next week.
hopefully Andrew Thomas will be back at left tackle, which should absolutely help the Giants' offensive line. But I have to say this, Tony, for as much criticism as Daniel Jones gets, isn't it amazing how welcome the news is that he's going to be back this week, considering the state of affairs and what we saw on Sunday? It's just amazing that the first answer the first response that you think of is, thank God,
Yep.
a real quarterback, Yep. So
you don't know what you've got till it's gone.
Well, and I do agree with you that the Giants absolutely have a decision to make. Daniel Jones, I keep saying this, that 4-year contract is not really a 4-year contract. It is really a 2-year contract. This was really all along a 2-year prove it contract for Daniel Jones, to show that what he did last year was really just the beginning of what he could do. And the Giants gave him that window. And the only way that he's going to show whether or not the Giants need to be in the quarterback market, and they're probably going to be in the top 10 in the draft, if not in the top 5. The only way he's going to legitimately show that is by being on the field with Andrew Thomas, with Saquon Barkley, with Wan'Dale Robinson, hopefully with Darren Waller, with as much of the offense intact as possible. And let's see for a half a season if this Giants offense can resemble what they expected it to be. Let's see over the next 9 games if they can be something that they can go forward with, where they don't have to start over at quarterback. I think that's the best part of the news that Jones is back.
Yeah, and I mean, I personally want to see him succeed. Just first of all, I think he's a good guy, and I think he's done some great things for the Giants. He's never blamed anyone but himself for any of his problems, and I really would like to see him succeed. Just strategically, as a Giants fan, I'd like to see him succeed, because if the Giants are going to have a pretty high draft choice next year, I'd much rather see them be going after an offensive lineman or an edge defender, or a top wide receiver. You name the position you think the Giants need. The Giants need stars at many positions, but you'd hope that they wouldn't have to use another high draft pick on a quarterback, and especially now that they don't have too many draft picks at the moment.
Absolutely. It is better for the franchise if Daniel Jones shows them that they don't need to be in the quarterback market in the first or second round. Absolutely, because as you said, they can go get another offensive lineman, they can go get another edge rusher. If they're sitting there in position to draft Marvin Harrison Jr., they can do that. If whatever position it is, if it's a big time defensive tackle on the inside, whatever position it is, they can do that rather than having to start over, which is basically what you're doing when you draft a quarterback that early. So we'll cross our fingers. We'll hope that Daniel Jones stays healthy. I'm hoping later on this morning we get to talk to Brian Daboll. I think that's at 11:30 Eastern time. And we should also get to talk to select players in light of this morning's news, which, to give credit where it's due, was first broken, as far as I know, by Ryan Dunleavy of the New York Post. I'm hoping that the Giants make Daniel Jones available to us via Zoom this morning. Usually Jones speaks on Wednesday, but I'm hoping that they'll put him on the call today so that we can talk to him. And if that's the case, well, either way, the post up at Big Blue View that mentions the Jones news will be updated, at least with Brian Daboll quotes, hopefully with some Daniel Jones quotes as well. But that's the good news part of the day, Tony.
Yeah, and by the way, maybe, and I heard that actually he was cleared yesterday morning, even before the game occurred, and so in retrospect, I think the question that at least I've been asking, and I think a lot of other people have been asking. I don't know how much you want to go over the carcass of yesterday's game, but the question a lot of people have been asking was, if the Giants didn't trust Tommy DeVito to throw a pass, then why didn't they sign a veteran quarterback? And maybe now this is the answer, that they knew that Jones was about to be coming off the injury and was going to be cleared soon, and they figured, well, we'll try to sneak through one more week with what we've got before we make the move to let him go, rather than do something else that is more difficult from a financial standpoint and a personnel standpoint. But either way, it turned out to be a disaster. But I'm just glad that he's back.
Yeah, before we fully get into yesterday's game, Tony, I'll take that question a step further. If they knew he was seeing the doctor on Sunday morning, why, I wonder if they thought about, because they ruled him out on Friday, and I'm not sure what the rules are, but once you rule a guy out, you can't, I'm not sure if it's written in stone, but you rule a guy out on Friday, as far as I know, you can't rule him back in on Sunday. I wonder if there was any thought given, since they knew he was seeing the doctor on Sunday morning. They had to know he was seeing the doctor on Sunday morning. I wonder if there was any thought given to the idea of listing him as doubtful or questionable on Friday, and perhaps making him, giving themselves the option of making him available as the backup on on Sunday afternoon. I don't know. Maybe that'll come up today when we get a chance to talk to Brian Daboll. As I said, I'd have to look up the rules on that, but I would assume that that in order for that to have been a possibility at all, that they would have had to list him as questionable or doubtful. So, as I said, hopefully that'll come up during the conversation later today with Brian Daboll.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Tony, let's talk about the debacle on Sunday a little bit. And my first comment is that game really justifiably should have ended in a tie. It really should have ended in a tie. That was really the only appropriate outcome. Both of those teams were ridiculously awful in so many ways yesterday. I mean, that set New York football back for decades. I think the way that game unfolded yesterday, I have to say, it was compelling. All right. It was compelling. It was interesting, but it was awful. Neither one of those teams can play offense, or could play offense. And it was an absolute utter mistake fest on both sides. It was just, it was terrible.
Yeah. And obscured, by all the awful things that happened to the Giants at the end of the game is the fact that, as you say, that the Jets have just about as much problem on offense as the Giants do, because their quarterback situation, obviously at some point Aaron Rodgers comes back, and now there's even thought that he might come back this season, but and Zach Wilson is not as terrible as he was. I think he has improved some, okay, but he's not a guy that can lead you to the playoffs at this point in his career. Maybe he will get there at some point. They do have at least one really good wide receiver, as Deonte Banks found out yesterday, and their offensive line is a mess also, just like the Giants is. And so the Jets do not have a playoff caliber offense at this point. Yet they find themselves, I believe, I didn't actually check the standings, but I believe they find themselves only one game out of the division lead this morning.
They're 4-3, and they're in position to get there if things go their way. They have won a couple of games that you would not have expected them to win. And the way yesterday's game unfolded, you put that game in that category as well. I was really clear in my things I think column after the game. I was really clear that I disagreed with Brian Daboll's decision on 4th and 1 at the end of the game. Our poll showed, I think 58% of the voters agreed with me that the Giants should have gone for the first down there. And if you guys didn't read my column, I will explain my reasoning for that. Giants up by 3, 28 seconds left in the game. Jets have no timeouts. Field goal puts the Giants up by 6. And yes, it's 97% possible, according to analytics, that even if the Giants miss the field goal, they win the game. It's probably 98 or 99% possible that they win the game if they make the field goal. But in my view, you still open the door for something miraculous to happen for the Jets by kicking the field goal and only going up by 6. And the only way that you effectively end the game and guarantee that you win the game is by getting the first down. Get the first down, because then you just walk off the field. You don't even have to run another play. So that's where I stand on it. And I understand it was, even after they missed, it was miraculous that the Jets won the game. It never should have happened. But, there was only a 2 or 3% chance that it would happen. But my take is that the Giants left the door open for it to happen, and they had an opportunity. They had an opportunity to close that door and didn't take it. So with that said, I'm gonna give you the floor, Tony, and I'm gonna see where you stood on that decision.
So I will say that at the time I was conflicted, and I was not cursing at the TV when they decided to go for the field goal. It was in the back of my mind that Gano had missed 2 field goals in the past 2 weeks, and I was wondering what's actually going on since he has this bad left knee. But I didn't necessarily think it was terrible. However, in retrospect, I think the part that uh, that I hadn't given enough thought to, that after the game, I realized that was a more important thing than I realized, is that I think one of the key things is that you said there was 28 seconds left. And the difference between missing the field goal and going for it on 4th down is that if you go for it on 4th down, you run a few extra seconds off the clock and you don't stop the clock. I believe
The other part of that, Tony, is the other part of that, and I don't know how much it matters, but you also give the Jets the ball at the 16 or 17
right.
yard line
Yeah.
instead of at the
Yeah.
25. So you make them go a little bit farther in a little bit less time.
Right, right. And the part about running the clock down a few seconds is that given the specific amount of time left, 28 seconds, if you do run a few extra seconds off the clock, and now the clock is down to, let's say, around 20 seconds or something like that, then it's basically impossible to run 2 plays the way they were able to miraculously do. And so if they get the ball back with, say, 20 seconds, 19 seconds left, they've basically got one play, and either it's a bomb that they complete to get them into field goal range, which would have to be a pretty impressive play, or they're just not going to get into field goal range. And so I thought there was a time management issue there that they should have thought through and didn't think through properly. And of course, then you're also opening up the possibility that he actually gets the first down and that the game is over. And so
Absolutely. And
yeah,
the other part of that, and Saquon Barkley was asked about this at the end of the game, and he kind of deferred. He didn't criticize the decision. He didn't, he didn't want to go there because he wasn't going to criticize Brian Daboll. But for me, the other part of the decision was, as hard as you rode Saquon Barkley Sunday, a career high 36 carries, 25 carries in the second half, which is more carries than he's had in all but 3 games in his entire career. As hard as you rode Saquon Barkley yesterday, and the fact that he's your best player, and you're clearly acknowledging that he's your best player, can't you give him a chance to get you one more yard and win a game? For me, that's the other part of it, is give the ball to your best player, and and then you can sit here if it doesn't work and say, we gave the ball to Barkley, we put the ball in the hands of our best player, and the Jets made a play. And at that point, as we've talked about, still it's going to take a miracle for the Jets to get down the field and get that field goal that they eventually got.
Yeah. No, I agree. Right. It's tough running him 36 times, but what's the difference between 36 and 37?
Mm-hmm.
It's going to have ramifications for next week. I mean, they can't give him much of a load next week, and they're not in great shape at running back with other options. But yeah, after thinking about it a while, I agree with you that they had more ways to win the game by going for it on 4th down than by not going for it. And so it's just another bad decision.
What's interesting is you said
One
another
of several,
bad decision. Yeah, I thought they should have gone for it on 4th and 1 earlier in the game. I thought that what I think in all, and I'm not going to blame Tommy DeVito for anything that happened yesterday. He wasn't asked to do anything. He basically was put in the game to hand the ball off.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but what I'm looking at is Brian Daboll won Coach of the Year last year. Joe Schoen was widely praised for everything that he did. And in no way, shape, or form am I going to call for anybody's job? I think it's way too soon for that. I think that you have to realize that it's still a long-term rebuild, that it's still the second year, and these guys have built up some equity with what happened last year. But with all of that said, going all the way back to the offseason, there have been some mystifying personnel decisions. The way that they constructed the reserves on the offensive line, the fact that they've depended on Tommy DeVito and didn't sign a quarterback after Daniel Jones got hurt, which came back to haunt them yesterday. You can look up and down the roster at some of the decisions that they made, not going after an additional edge rusher, acquiring Boogie Basham, who's doing nothing for them. And then you look at the fact that they clearly were not ready to play football week 1 against the Dallas Cowboys. You look at some of the in-game management, some of that has happened this year, some of the in-game decisions that have been made. And it's mystifying how things went so well last year, how every decision that these guys made last year seemed to turn to gold, and how so much of what they've done this year has been questionable, and how there have been so many in-game decisions, whether it's clock management, whether it's game plans, whether it's personnel usage, so many of those things that have been questionable. But as I said, I'm not calling for anybody's job. I think the Giants have got to get off this 2-year cycle of head coaches. They've got to give this regime a chance to play this out and see where it goes over the course of 4 years or whatever, and then decide. But it's been mystifying. I just haven't understood a whole lot of what's happened this year. So I don't know if you feel the same way that I do, Tony.
Yeah, I do. I think there's, I guess the only things I would add to that are that it's funny to see the kind of the change in tone this year. The thing that I think won over Giants fans right away last year, or the two things that won them over last year, was number one, that Dable effectively announced with his actions in the very first game that he was playing to win, right? And so I mean, Giants fans went crazy just when the broadcaster said, and they're leaving their offense on the field in Tennessee and going for the 2-point conversion in the first game, and everybody went crazy. And of course, the fact that Saquon made that with a great play, that made everybody go even crazier. But just the fact that he would do that and try to win the game rather than say, look, if we tie it up here, Tennessee's probably going to go down and kick a field goal, or they'll beat us in overtime or whatever. So let's just try to win it right here. It established a mood, I think, as to what he was going to do. You look at the Green Bay game where they had so many of their offensive players out. And a hurt Jones playing when he probably shouldn't have after the Chicago game. I guess it was the week before, and still they managed to put 28 points, I think it was, on the board against a pretty decent Green Bay defense with innovative play calling and things like that. And this year, we're seeing a much more cautious Brian Dable. As far as I'm concerned, we're seeing a much more cautious Brian Dable.
That's what bothered me yesterday, Tony, and I apologize for kind of interrupting you, but what bothered me yesterday about the game, about the game plan, once DeVito got into the game, and especially in the second half, DeVito went 0 for 4 passing the ball in the first half, but you still occasionally have to try. You get a first down at midfield. I think the Giants took over at midfield at one point. Why not take one deep shot down the sideline? Take a deep shot down the sideline, and if it's incomplete, it's probably going to be out of bounds. And if it gets intercepted, it's still 40 yards down the field. So whatever. But what bothered me yesterday was once they got that lead, and even when they were driving, they went 12 plays, 75 yards. I think I think a couple of those, I think some of that was started by Jets penalties, if I remember correctly. I mean, I might be wrong about that, but the idea was they ran the ball all the way down the field. They never threw the ball once. They played the second half and shoot, even the overtime, because the two passes they threw were swing passes behind the line of scrimmage.
Mm-hmm.
They played not to lose the game. And when you play not to lose, you invariably lose. And I wrote it, and I hate to mention it. I hate myself for even writing it, but this was Joe Judge against the Washington football team with everything except the victory formation, sneaks, kneel downs, whatever. This was absolutely Joe Judge. I don't trust this football team, so we're just going to victory formation so we don't screw up.
Yeah, and the thing about running all the time and never throwing downfield is that you just make it harder on your running game, on the running back and the blockers, because the defense knows it's coming. And I mean, God bless Saquon Barkley. I mean, I thought he had a tremendous game yesterday, and the Jets are a good defense, a very good defense. They knew that he was going to get the ball every time, just about, and he still managed to rack up 128 yards and important first downs, and so on and so forth. And yeah, so you have to keep the defense honest, and you have to find ways to throw the ball down the field. The other thing, though, that I keep on coming back to is that I remembered before the season started, and all the reporters asked Joe Schoen before the season, how he, whether he thought the Giants could go further in the playoffs this year or whatever. I don't remember what the exact questions were asked. And every time people asked him about the coming season, he was always saying, "We'll see, we'll see, we'll see," and he was never willing to say one word of optimism about the coming season. And I just wonder, thinking back to that, whether they saw things in training camp that made them leery of how this team was going to do this year before this team ever got on the field, or whether it was just kind of normal caution not to build up people's expectations. But the whole vibe of this season, right from that point on, has been different. They've been so cautious in everything they've done, and it doesn't even feel like the way they approached things last year.
I agree with that. I do think that Joe Schoen sort of, we should have picked up on his "we'll see" a little bit more than we did. I think everybody wanted to be optimistic. Everybody wanted to look at 9-7-1 and a playoff win and say, all right, they're at least, they're middle of the pack. They're on their way. Maybe they're not there yet. They made some interesting offseason moves with Darren Waller and Bobby Okereke, and maybe they can be that again. Maybe with some luck, they can get even closer. I think that Joe Schoen was warning us in his own way. He was warning us that there might be some regression coming. I mean, you have to realize, look at what the Giants were the second half of last year, and now what they have been this season. They were 7-2 at one point last year and finished 10-8-1. They're 2-6 now. So you're talking about 5. I think it's, if my math is right here in my head, that's 5-11-1 over their last 17 games.
Yeah.
So I think Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll knew that 7-2, as much as it created so much optimism and expectations and all that, I think they knew it was a little bit of smoke and mirrors.
Apparently.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And how much it was smoke and mirrors, I guess, is pretty obvious now. And I mean, that having been said, most of that statement is on the offensive side of the ball. The defense has gotten pretty good. I'll just say one thing, if I can just carp about one thing on the defense, talk about playing it cautious this year rather than going for the win. But after they rushed the hell out of Zach Wilson all day yesterday. You get down to the key point in the game at the end, and they rush 3 and go into prevent defense. And as people have said, the only thing a prevent defense does is it prevents you from winning the game. And
yep, and that 3-man rush on that first play with soft coverage that basically allowed a completion in the middle set up what happened.
Yeah.
Because it put the Jets in position where, I mean, on the next play, they did rush and they flushed Zach Wilson out of the pocket.
Yeah.
But Allen Lazard got open. He beat Adoree Jackson. He got open. And that 3-man rush, that decision was a crusher. I happen to agree with you. It's like you've got to play the way that you play. And the Giants went against what Wink Martindale is known for. They went against tendency, and that cost them in that instance, because again and again and again in that game yesterday, Zach Wilson made bad throws under pressure. And he made a good throw when he was allowed to just sit there.
Mm-hmm.
But so yes, I definitely agree with you on that 3-man rush. Tony, let's talk about one final topic here before we call it a day. Tuesday afternoon is the NFL trade deadline. Your New York Giants are 2-6. I don't necessarily want to call them sellers to the extent that they're going to have a fire sale. I don't think that's necessary. I don't think they need to trade off everybody. I don't think they need to trade Saquon, which they're not going to do anyway. They don't need to go trade Evan Neal. They don't need to trade, they don't need to trade everything that's not nailed down. But I do think there's a strong possibility that a couple of veteran players are going to be ex-Giants by 4:00 on Tuesday afternoon. I think there's a strong possibility that Leonard Williams is somewhere else. I think there's a strong possibility that the defensive pass interference and getting beaten by Allen Lazard are the last 2 times we notice Adoree Jackson as a New York Giant. And but I think you mentioned it earlier in the show that Giants could use the draft capital. The other reality of it is they have less than $2 million in cap space right now, which might also be part of the reason they didn't sign a veteran quarterback. But they have less than $2 million in cap space, can't get through the rest of the season that way. They're not going to sign Adoree Jackson or Leonard Williams to long-term contracts. I think that, and they can save significant cap money by moving one or both of those guys. So I think those are the 2 names to watch between now and the deadline.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I mean, the question is whether anyone will be interested in those players, and then what they can get for those players. These days, NFL trades of personnel for draft picks it's becoming very common when you trade someone just to kind of get rid of them, that all the other team gives you back is an exchange of draft picks so that you move up 1 round in some future draft. And so I don't know that we should expect all that much in any trades that they make, but I agree with you that if they could get something decent for Leonard Williams, they should do it. And by all means, Adoree Jackson, I thought at one time was a pretty good cornerback for the Giants, but he has not looked good for, I think, a year now. He certainly has not looked good this season, and he was terrible yesterday at the key moments. You mentioned him letting Lazard get open. I can forgive that a little bit. The thing I can't forgive is in overtime, where he's defending against a guy that was just called up from the practice squad by the Jets, and he lets the guy get 5 yards behind him and then never looks back at the ball and just runs into the guy. I mean, that's a rookie type mistake. That's not something a veteran cornerback should do.
No, he's defending a practice squad wide receiver with the game on the line, and he gets beaten deep, and which is the one, it's the absolutely unforgivable thing. Unforgivable. Now, in a scramble drill, as you said, in a scramble drill, Zach Wilson's running out of the pocket. At the end of the game, in a scramble drill, when you're man to man, that's going to happen. The Giants put themselves in that situation. That's going to happen. But the defensive pass interference was just ridiculous. And I like Adoree'. He's been a good player. He went back there and returned punts last year when he probably shouldn't have. I don't know how much moving into the slot, messed him up this year, for the few weeks that the Giants put him in there, but he has not had a good season. Wouldn't be surprised at all if the Giants move on from him. And as I said, wouldn't be surprised at all if they move on from Leonard Williams. Leonard Williams has the biggest cap hit in the league that's for non-quarterbacks. And I'm guessing the Giants would have to eat some of that money to move him. But I seriously doubt that they're going to consider re-signing him. So if you can get a fourth round draft pick for Leonard Williams, maybe you do that. And I'm sure that you can get something for Adoree' Jackson, because all the good teams out there, all the playoff caliber teams are looking for help at cornerback. They're all looking for an extra guy that can, that can cover. So I'm sure they can get something for Adoree'. Maybe not as much as they might get for Leonard Williams, but I'm sure they can get something. The only other guy I'll mention is Paris Campbell. And I understand why people mention Paris Campbell, because the Giants simply aren't using Paris Campbell. They've moved on from Paris Campbell. They've clearly, given that job to Wan'Dale Robinson. And Paris Campbell is an afterthought who's not going to be a Giant next year either. But let's be real. Paris Campbell is going to bring you a conditional 7th round pick at most. Mm-hmm. That's what he's going to give you, is a 7th round pick with a bunch of strings attached to it. So it doesn't really matter whether the Giants move him or not.
Yeah, or one of these exchange picks. Mm-hmm. Trades like are increasingly being made, where they they give the Giants they let the Giants move up from a 7th round to a 6th round pick in 2025 or something.
Yeah, something like that. NBA style trades. Mm-hmm. We'll give you a 2nd round pick in 2037.
Right.
It's like, how is that even legal? How is that possible? Mm-hmm. But anyway, Tony, I don't have anything else today. Giants fans, as I said earlier, Brian Daboll speaks to media at 11:30. I'll be on that call. Hopefully, Daniel Jones will speak to media shortly thereafter. So stick with Big Blue View to find out what Daboll says and what Jones says if he speaks. Also, please like, share, and subscribe if you're watching us on YouTube, and subscribe across the Big Blue View Radio Network. All right, folks, thank you for listening. Stay safe out there, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.